Home Buying 101, important things to know when you're buying a home. I've done a similar version of this, this presentation in the past for the University of Maryland, but this is kind of an updated 2020 COVID-19 edition, if you will. Chris and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit with some different slides here, so we'll just kind of hop in. First off, I always like to start with a disclaimer. Real estate is constantly changing. I can tell you something today and it may not be the most accurate information tomorrow. So anytime you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always available, especially when things are starting to change. It's different everywhere. With the University of Maryland, you know, we have alumni all over the country, all over the world. And I have people from literally all over the world call me, asking me real estate questions. I'm licensed in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So those are the areas that I have the most knowledge on. I have a lot of knowledge of the broad real estate market as a whole. But when it comes down to specific regulations or really specific market knowledge for a neighborhood or something like that, I will always defer to a local expert. If you have questions about a certain area, if you're in California and you're looking to buy in California, feel free to give me a call. I will answer questions as best as I can, but at the end of the day, I'm going to kind of push you over to somebody who I know will help you out there. And finally, every situation is unique. I can deal with 15 people in a week and have 16 different situations. You know, things change. Everybody is looking for something different. Everybody has a different income situation or debt situation or whatever. Everybody is unique, so every situation is unique. And so we're going to give you a lot of general information, but when you want to get down to the nitty-gritty of your specific situation, feel free to give me or Chris a call, and we can point you to somebody who will help you with whatever you need help with. So that's my disclaimer. So one of the big questions I get a lot is owning versus renting, and is owning really that big of a benefit over renting? So I like to start this section with just kind of to break down percentage of buyers, median ages. I've had a lot of people tell me that, oh, I'm 28 years old and I feel like I'm so behind all my friends because I don't own a home yet. In reality, first-time home buyers, their median age is 32. And you can see some breakdowns of some other stats here. So again, remember what I said earlier about every situation is unique. The perfect time for you to buy your first home is the perfect time for you to buy your first home. Don't ever feel like you're behind somebody else or you're ahead of somebody else, because what's going to work for you is different from what's going to work for them.
If I can add in there, we get that a lot with what's an appropriate amount to put down on the loan. And I know we're coming up on that, but just to chime in, whatever fits your unique situation is what we're always going to recommend is the best thing for you. Yeah. Always context, I think, is important.
Yeah. So this graph here is talking about home ownership rates. You can see that in 2016, they've been steadily rising ever since. Peaked in 2005, and then we had some issues in the real estate market. But at the end of the day, you know, probably 95 at least % of people want to own a home someday. And this graph kind of shows that those rates of home ownership are not declining in people on the younger side, you know, the millennials. That's still a big want of theirs, and that's still something we need to pay attention to going forward. So this slide is actually from last year, and I left it in here to show you the change from last year to this year. Historically, the income needed, or the percentage of your income needed to afford a median rent, was roughly 25.8% of your income. So think of how much money you make and how much you're paying in rent, and see if that kind of jives. That's what we see nationally. Right now, though, as of a year ago, it was at 27.7. And then you can see underneath the percentage of income needed to purchase a median home, historically was at 21.1%, and as of a year ago was at 17.5. So if we move to updated information, it's actually gotten slightly more expensive to rent and about 2% cheaper to own a home. And that's not even looking at building equity and the long-term benefits that you're going to see from owning versus renting. So just that alone, it should be probably a big light bulb moment for people that if you're renting, you should be thinking about the possibility of owning your own home down the line. And then as far as existing home prices, this is year over year. So this is updated as of about a week ago, I believe. And this is just talking about the change in home prices from a year ago to right now. We fall into the northeast column in this graph here. So roughly homes are 8.3% more expensive than they were last year. And we don't really see that changing too much over time. So that's something to keep in mind when you're in the, okay, do we renew our lease now and buy next year, or do we try to buy now? Those types of things need to be thought about. So that's what that's all about. So if you remember the old show, The password is equity. That's why people, for the most part, want to own their own home. That's where the biggest wealth is generated from buying a home, is that it, on 99% of the cases, will increase in value over time. David Bach, who is an economist and pays a lot of attention to the housing market specifically, said not prioritizing home ownership is the single biggest mistake millennials are making, and that buying a home is an escalator to wealth. And what he means there is that by buying a home earlier on, you will be able to generate more wealth for yourself overall down the line. If you can be putting the same amount of money into a mortgage payment that you would have into a rent payment, but the asset that you purchased, the home, is worth 5% more every year, year over year, your wealth is going up quite a bit over that period of time. This is another breakdown, home prices. This is broken down a little bit more. Specifically, we're in the South Atlantic region here, different source, but again, 5% across the country that home prices are up. So even if you use the conservative one here of 5%, think about a home price and think about what it's going to be worth 10 years from now. That's compounding over and over again. It's quite a bit of money. Homeowner equity insight from CoreLogic. So this quote's a little bit old, but it does kind of shed some light on what we've been talking about. So in the first quarter of 2019, average homeowner gained approximately $6,400 in equity during the past year. So in just a year, their home was on average worth $6,400 more. That's $6,400 in your pocket that you haven't done anything to create other than just owning your home instead of renting it. So equity is really the big golden star that we're looking for here. Chris, we're going to talk about interest rates here. So I'm going to let you hop in. Interest rates matter a lot.
They definitely do. And what I will say is that interest rates, this this graph is again from 2018. So prior to the pandemic, a lot of economists, a lot of folks in the industry were predicting that rates were going to go up. And quite honestly, I've said for the past 3 years, rates were going to go up. And what we've seen with the pandemic, rates have actually fallen. Now they are, with the volatility in the market, at or near historical lows on an almost weekly basis. So in this, if you look back, from the 2018 projection, they were at 4.02, thinking it was going to be 4.8. In fact, we've seen rates come down even further into the mid to low threes. So kind of putting this in the context of, and let me enter this disclaimer, if it's right for you, right? You never want to buy a house because of an interest rate. But if you're ready to buy a house, now is a great time to take advantage of some really low interest rates.
Yeah, and I really like this slide that's up now because it talks about what the change in interest rates does to your mortgage payment. So the combination of the change in interest rate and the change in home price, you can see, and that's just the projection for a year of interest rate change and a year of appreciation on home prices, makes quite a bit difference in the mortgage payment. So that's something that we like to say to keep in mind. What what is a mortgage payment going to look like next year if you were to wait. So, and that's increase in payments monthly, annually, and over the 30 years, just kind of stretched out.
And I think this graph really shows, what we're expecting now. It's hard to really say where rates are going to go. I think we all want that crystal ball, whether it's for your retirement account, your investments, or mortgage rates. You kind of want to know what the future is going to hold. That being said, Freddie Mac is really forecasting, as you can see here in Q3 and Q4 of this year, pretty stable, the average rate being around 3.2, maybe even potentially dipping down into 3.1. If for a lot of us, our parents bought houses in a time period, as you can see, as you move back in that graph, where rates were a lot higher. Even in these scenarios, in like the early 2000s, they're higher, but think of the context of the 80s and 90s, we're talking double digits at one point. So
yeah, it was up to 18 at one point, I believe.
What's that?
I think it was up to 18 at one point in the 80s. Yeah.
So historically speaking, we're spoiled, for lack of a better word. Right now is about as cheap as it's going to be to borrow money for a purchase. And as everyone's probably aware, we're in a pretty expensive area. So anytime you get the chance to borrow a sum of money, it's great to keep it as cheap as possible. Mm-hmm. I think we were looking at a strong next few quarters of potentially low interest rates.
Chris, what would you say, just a ballpark average on a 30-year right now, conventional, from what you're seeing?
Ballparking it, good credit, not a big down payment. We're seeing rates at 3.375, and that's a par interest rate. And not to get too much in the weeds here, you always have the option to buy down rates. So you could always look at, once you're under contract and ready to lock in your rate, you can look to see, well, what's the cheapest rate I can get at no cost? And then can I buy it down, and does it make sense? And really at that time, it's always a consultation. But right now, we're seeing them right around 3.375.
So credit score is important. Kinda. Chris, if you want to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'd love to see in the chat how many people use Credit Karma or a credit card that has a tracking service. I would think almost all of us. In fact, I got an alert today from my Chase card about my credit score. We're all so focused on it, and it is important. It does influence your financing, but what I think you really see in this distribution here is the bulk of borrowers are actually not what's considered the high end of credit. You're seeing scores in the 8.1% from 600 to 649. A good portion of that 700 to 749. Whenever we help anybody with a credit score, you're always thinking about, well, that's a snapshot then. What can you do in the next week, month, year to continue to improve it? But there's a lot of great programs out there for the wide range of scores. So don't think if you don't have an 800, you can't buy a house. That's just simply not true. A lot of buyers are purchasing homes throughout the spectrum of credit scores.
Yep. And this is kind of another breakdown of the average FICO scores.
There you go.
Yeah, I know you like that one.
I'm seeing some questions here in the chat. Real quick, just about the hard inquiries from different lenders, because that's something we hear a lot of, and it's important to your score. Certainly, what the bureaus. Let me take a step back. We've been conditioned that hard inquiries are bad, and they are. They're really impactful when you have a ton of inquiries across a variety of industries. For example, you have 2 mortgage lenders, 3 auto loan companies, and a handful of credit card companies pulling your credit. You're going to start to see a negative impact from your score. By the same token, the bureaus don't want to punish you if you're shopping around for the best lender, right? So when you're searching for a program and you have to complete that hard inquiry, you're going to see that in a 30-day time frame, you can have 2 or 3 lenders pull your credit, and the impact to score is only going to be as if one inquiry occurred. seeing some more about hard versus soft. And I can jump in these into the questions section maybe, but the hard versus soft, let's I'll write that one down and we'll circle back to that one in Q&A. I'm going to jot a quick note down because I don't want to take up too much of the presentation time.
Yeah, and just so you know, everyone who's asking questions in the chat, I am recording them, and so we will get to as many as we can, if not all of them.
Awesome.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you. So down payments. This is a question that I get a lot of fun answers and fun feedback from. I have a lot of people tell me, it's going to take me 10 years to save 20%. My parents told me I need a 20% down payment. But if you look at this graph here, this was a Fannie Mae poll that they did, and they asked buyers what percentage they thought they needed for a down payment. A lot of people didn't know, and that's why we like to do these types of happy hours to help educate people. But only 17% actually had the right answer, if you will, of 1 to 5%. Most buyers only really need 1 to 5% of the purchase price of the home to go ahead and actually to purchase the home. First-time buyers on average use about 6%. All buyers is about 10, and repeat is 14. So you see that whole idea of the 20% down payment is not something that is as popular or as is done as often as it used to be. So I know my parents told me before I was in the real estate business that you have to save 20% to buy a house. But not really the situation anymore. Some extras about down payments. A third of first-time buyers got down payment assistance from family. Chris, if you want to talk about that just real quick.
Yeah, we see this a lot actually. A lot of times, first-time home buyers in our age bracket, right? Whether it's student loans or whatever might have come up, a prolonged job search, don't quite always have the down payment, or even if you do, sometimes we're seeing parents and family members, relatives helping out to increase that down payment. So it's very simple and straightforward to have a gift from a family member. What you want to do is just consult with your loan officer to really say, hey, mom and dad or my grandmother, whomever it might be, wants to help me with this purchase. What's the best way to facilitate it? Because as much as we want to make sure you get that assistance from family, we don't want cash from under the mattress just deposited in your account. We're a very paper-driven industry, right? So we got to document everything. It's not uncommon at all, and it's definitely worth exploring with everyone's families if that is an option for you.
There are over 2,500 programs to help with down payment assistance. Now that's nationwide, so there are not as many here in Maryland, but there are still a ton of programs. I'm sure Chris can rattle off a couple of them. But for anybody who is a first responder, military, teachers, there are all sorts of programs to help with down payment assistance. And then in most states, 3% down payment can be saved in less than a year. That's an average, and again, that's one of those every situation is unique, kind of things. But I read this in a news article from a real estate source, and I thought that was pretty cool to share. So the most important thing that we always say when you're thinking about purchasing a home is to get pre-approved first. And there are a couple of reasons why. I'm going to have Chris kind of talk about these steps here, about what the pre-approval looks like, and then we can kind of go into why it is the first step that you need to take.
Yeah, so a pre-approval is really a chance for not only your lender, but you to evaluate your goals. And what that means is it's going to include a credit check and a review of your income, but it's also going to help narrow down on your budget. So I always like the example that, you might want a $400,000 house, but you only want to pay for a $300,000 one, right? We like to back into that purchase price by first evaluating what's your monthly payment goal? What do you want to spend every month? And then from that number, say, okay, well, that number corresponds with a purchase price of X. whether that's 200,000, 300,000, whatever the case may be, so you can be targeted, right? So you can make sure that you're looking at the right priced home. And during the pre-approval process, you never know what might pop up in that credit report. So better to do it first, right? And if there is something, say a medical bill that slipped through the cracks or a credit card balance that might be a little bit high, you can address it then rather than after you've fallen in love with a home and then you feel like things are moving a million miles an hour.
Yeah. So Chris, you want to just go through kind of some of these steps here real quick?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So we start with determining your credit score by completing an inquiry. From there, we're going to review your income and bank statements. So what that means is taking a look at your pay statements, W-2s, bank statements to see what you have saved. Usually, typically there, if the gift is possible, we're going to initiate the process for, okay, with this gift and these funds in my checking account, I can buy, a $200,000 house. From there, you're really going to say, okay, we're going to go over the loan overview. We're going to say, this is what your down payment is, the loan structure, payment, so on and so forth, to make sure that you're comfortable with those goals, right? And that structure, and that once you hit the street looking for it, looking for a home, you're familiar with all the terms, you're familiar with the average costs. And then at the end of that conversation, we issue the formal pre-approval letter, which details that purchase price goal.
So reasons to start with the pre-approval, kind of like Chris was saying, to set expectations. What I found early on in my career when I didn't suggest to people that they start with a pre-approval, there were situations where, I went out with somebody and they found the perfect home. It was everything they'd ever wanted, say for $400,000. And they start the pre-approval process and find out that they're only approved for $300,000. Not only are they disappointed that they can't buy this perfect home that they thought was everything they'd ever wanted, but now everything that we look at that they can't afford will have to attempt to live up to that $400,000 home. And that was not a fun feeling for me. That was not a fun feeling for them. And it just made the process more of a drag than I could even describe to you. So I always like to push people as much as I can to get the pre-approval first to set those expectations. It helps you figure out your exact situation, again, where you can look, what you can look for, and it'll help you really narrow in on what you want. It helps you take advantage of programs that are available to you. So by talking to your lender first, they can let you know, hey, you are a veteran, you qualify for a VA loan, or you can qualify for these other programs like we talked about earlier with either down payment assistance or closing cost assistance or something like that. And it helps us make a plan. I don't like to go into things without some sort of a plan. If you want to see $1 million home tomorrow and a $200,000 home the next day, that's cool with me. But as long as that plan fits within what we're allowed to do and what you can afford, let's go do it. But I like to have a plan first. So, and I'm sure every other realtor in the world would prefer to have a plan going forward. One of the things I like to highlight is that buying a home doesn't happen overnight. On average, days to close a loan. So from the day you put in an offer on a home and it's accepted, you go under contract, to the day that you're handed the keys across the table and you pop a bottle of champagne and take some fun pictures for Instagram, roughly is about 45 days. That's what I like to tell people, 45 days. And it's a 45 days that can sometimes go by very quickly and sometimes go by very slowly, depending on the situation. But just keep in mind that when you're planning down the road, that needs to be taken into account. You can't say on December 1st, hey, I'd like to be in 2 weeks before Christmas so that I can have time to decorate and, put the snowmen out front and everything. I've seen it happen, but it's not something that, I think is a great idea going in. You should be planning ahead that's about the time it takes. And that's just from going under contract. There's also time to search for the perfect home and get all that stuff in order. Favorite thing that I love to talk about is HGTV. HGTV is entertainment. It's super entertaining. But is it real life? Not so much. I'm sure a lot of us have seen this meme. I think I probably post it absolutely every time I can, every time I see it, or at some iteration of it. Always makes me laugh. HGTV is really great to watch. You know, I've been watching a lot of it during the COVID situation, been home a lot. But there are some myths that come along with a lot of the TV shows on there. This is just a few of them, but I think these are some important ones. Myth number one is that buyers look at 3 homes and decide to purchase one of them. That's typically not the case. A lot of times in these shows, Love It or List It, Property Brothers, those types of shows, they actually already own the home that they buy. And they've owned it for a while usually. They go out and look at a couple others to make the show exciting, but typically they've owned the home for quite some time. The houses that buyers are touring are still for sale is a myth. Again, it's usually one that they already own, and they've just decided to use either some set pieces. I've heard that some of the houses in the shows are actually sets, and again, it's just to be entertaining to the masses. Finally, they haven't made a purchase decision yet. So keep all these things in mind when you watch HGTV, just like you know, any of the contractors or anything you see on those shows that say, oh yeah, you take 2x4s and 4 screws and you can build this amazing pergola. That may not be the case. You know, might be a lot more that goes into it than that. So watch HGTV, enjoy it, but you know, keep in mind that it's not exactly like real life happens. And finally, you want to interview the right people. And this comes down to real estate agents and to mortgage lenders. Not everybody's going to be the right fit for everybody. These are some things to look for. Chris, if you want to talk about the mortgage side, and I'll talk about the real estate side.
Yeah, so there's probably a lot of carryover in this instance, but understanding the local market is key on the mortgage side. And I'm not picking on some of the bigger national lenders, but they're just not as rooted in the community as we are, right? So on local lenders, we live in this market. We operate here on a daily basis. We understand what sort of programs you're eligible for, right? The down payment assistance that's available. We understand what's expected in the market, what's normal. And some of the larger lenders might come in, right? You might never meet them face to face, or you might not ever have an opportunity to really have the educational piece with them. But you've heard their radio commercial and they're, you know, for whatever reason you call them. We really like to highlight the people on the, you know, the boots on the ground here because of our expertise in this market, and we're your neighbors, simply put.
And the most important thing for me in that regard, from the real estate agent perspective, looking at the lender, a lot of the big corporations, big lenders, if you will, are very 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And if you just think about it logically, most of the time that people go to look at homes are when they're off work, which is after 5 o'clock or Saturday and Sunday. So if we have a question, if we need a letter for an offer, which we typically do, a pre-approval letter, I need to be able to contact your lender. And if we're looking at a home on Saturday at 8 o'clock at night, and you decide you want to put in an offer, I need to be able to talk to your lender to get specifics to put that offer together. If they don't answer the phone, then we're kind of SOL until they decide to get back to us. You know, again, there are some great lenders that work for big corporations that will answer their phone in the evenings and on weekends. But I found a lot of the time they're just 9 to 5. So keep that in mind. That's my soapbox from the real estate agent perspective. So, and then as far as what to look for in a real estate agent, there's a big difference between real estate agents and realtors. People kind of use that term interchangeably, but a realtor is actually somebody who has decided to go a little bit farther and join the Realtor Association. What that means is they're held to a specifically higher set of standards as far as education, ethics, and how they treat the client. So be on the lookout for that. About 50% of real estate agents in the country are realtors. So just something that I like to clarify. A lot of people use that term interchangeably. On this list, I have GRI, which is a graduate of the Realtor Institute. That's kind of something we look at in real estate, is like getting your master's in real estate, basically. Less than 7% of realtors in the country have their GRI designation. I have mine. I had to go through a lot of extra schooling and projects and stuff like that to earn that designation. It's something I'm really proud of, but always take a look to see if the real estate agent you're considering has that designation. It just means that they're committed to a higher level, and especially of education for themselves, which will only benefit you. There are other designations out there, ePro, SAS, a bunch of other ones. Look them up online. If you see a bunch of letters next to a real estate agent's name, throw it in Google. You'll find out what it means pretty quickly. It's a good sign that they're looking for education for themselves that they can pass down to you. And then obviously a reputable company and local experience. Like Chris was saying, you wouldn't call somebody from California to help you buy a home in Annapolis. So you need local experience and local knowledge in a real estate agent so that they can help you navigate the market and really come to the true value of a home, so that you're being taken care of in the best way possible when you're looking to buy. Real quick, we're just going to touch on the impact of COVID-19. Obviously, it's everything everybody's talking about right now, as it should be. This is a graph from Showing Time. Showing Time is a company that real estate agents use to help schedule showings of homes. And they released this graph a little while ago. And basically this is just showing the number of showings, or the flow of real estate showings over the past few months, few weeks. And you can see, around March 8th, it took a real big dive. And obviously that correlates to the time when a lot of stuff started being, getting shut down and quarantines were going into place, that sort of thing. But over the last few weeks, it's come back up to normal. I've had a lot of people really surprised that the real estate market, as far as, homes being sold, people going out to see houses, doing virtual open houses and that sort of thing, they're kind of surprised that real estate has stayed pretty stable. I've been working a lot, actually. I'm pretty sure Chris has been working a lot recently. So, I think a lot of people thought that this would be a downtime where they could just kind of hang back and wait a few extra months and wait for spring market to come up later in the year, but it hasn't really slowed down what we were expecting to see. And then this is a projection for GDP from 4 major financial institutions. Obviously, Q1 was into the negative, Q2 projection as well to be in the negative, but 3 of the 4 in Q3 project GDP to bounce back, and they all expected to bounce back in Q4. And what that means to us is that the real estate market is going to be booming like a normal spring market would. So the fact that you guys are on this happy hour call now, this virtual happy hour to get yourself ready for the future, puts you ahead of a lot of people. Because once everything's open again, the market is most likely what a lot of people are saying is going to kind of blow up and be very, very busy and very competitive. So having all your ducks in a row now is super important. We can hop into some questions now in just a second. Just want to let you all know, if you ever have any questions you think of later, if you want some more information, give me a call, give Chris a call. I have some PDF homebuyer guides, some printed homebuyer guides I can send to you guys. Just let me know where you want it sent and I'll send it out. It's a cool resource. I can email them. I update them every quarter. So this is info for Chris. And I'll see if I can, Hamatha, is there a way to send out this PowerPoint to everybody afterwards?
Yes, I will. Yeah. I'm recording it.
Awesome, cool. So this will get sent out to everybody. So you'll have our info. There's mine. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. We would appreciate it. that's fun for us to be able to interact with people. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And if we want to go to questions, that is cool with me.
Great. Thanks so much. That was a
Yeah.
really informative and thorough presentation. I would say that you wouldn't be bringing a PowerPoint with you to the happy hour if we did it in person. So I guess that's a benefit. But having done this with you in person, happy to see that it's equally fabulous. So there are several questions in the queue. I'm happy to ask the questions, but I also feel like people want an opportunity to sort of like interact with David and Chris. I want to give folks the opportunity. So I'll start with Juliana, if that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Hi. So I'm actually kind of starting the process on the home buying, and that's why I asked about the hard inquiry and all of that. So that was really useful about knowing, if I can check with different lenders. However, they did tell me that I have to compare APRs, and I'm just not sure what's the difference between the interest rate and the APR and what these ones include, and also about the closing cost negotiations.
Yeah, so I guess, Dave, I'll take the APR question if you want to tackle closing costs.
Sure.
An APR is, it's a really useful tool in comparing loan offers across different companies. So what it is it's a representation of the note rate, which is the interest rate you're being charged for the loan. So let's just use the example of 3.5%. So we'll use it if you had two offers, 3.5% would be the note rate. That's the rate at which interest is accruing on the loan. Now the APR is a reflection of the lender costs for that rate. So you sometimes have fixed lender fees, then you may pay discount points for that rate. So the APR is designed for you to evaluate which rate is cheaper, all things equal, right? So if you're both at 3.5%, but one APR is higher, that means that lender is charging you more fees for that interest rate.
Understood. And I just have, while we are in here, when is the right, or when are you available to do the rate locking?
So almost every lender I'm aware of will lock in your interest rate once you're under contract.
Okay.
And there used to be some what you would see called lock and shop products where you could lock in an interest rate for a fee up front. But given all the market volatility occurring right now due to the pandemic, it's hard to predict any sort of vision of where rates are going to be. And so a lot of lenders have eliminated that lock and shop feature. So usually it's once you're under contract, you can lock in that rate right away.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
And to touch on your question about closing costs and can they be negotiated, 99% of the time they can be negotiated. A lot of times, especially with first-time buyers, we'll see them ask for a seller credit toward the closing costs. Typically, a lot of loan programs, you can go up to 3%, which makes a huge difference. We've had several clients, even recently, that have, come to the table with very little money, if anything at all, because the closing costs are being covered by the seller. So that's absolutely negotiable. And it's one of those situation-specific things to talk about with your real estate agent and your lender when you get to the point of getting ready to make an offer on a home.
Great.
Okay. That sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks, Juliana. So I'm going to now go to, you may have already touched on this, but I wonder if there's additional follow-up from Matthew Hudson. Matthew, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now.
Yeah, I mean, I was just asking about, it's really like hard not to be scared that things that have happened in the past can happen again with all like the kind of financial turmoil that's happening. So I guess could you just elaborate a little? I mean, you did a good job in the presentation, but maybe elaborate a little more on like indicators that you see that maybe we are not headed towards another real estate crash or downturn.
Sure. Dave, do you mind if I start on this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we've seen a lot of positive data why this pandemic might be different than say the 2008 collapse. And, as a mortgage lender, it's kind of hard to say this, but we had a lot to do with that, that collapse back then. Very loose lending habits. We're seeing a lot of, and a key metric is we were seeing a lot of homeowners complete cash out refinances where they're pulling all of their equity out of the home and basically treating their house like an ATM. Lending standards are completely different these days, much more restrictive on the equity you can pull out. At the same token, and Dave can probably elaborate more on this, we're not seeing that crazy appreciation in the lead up to 2008 that we, the appreciation in 2008 and leading up to it was very high, very close to double digit numbers, whereas we're in a much more stable market now. But Dave, I'll let you tackle that part.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases back in 08, we were seeing 10 to 12% appreciation being accounted for. Home prices were skyrocketing, and right now it's at 4 to 5% in the DMV area. Nationwide, 3 to 4%. Maryland, the DMV is a little bit higher, just because of a lot of the the reasons that people want to move to this area. We have such proximity to DC and Baltimore, and it's a very sought after area. So the appreciation is a little bit higher here, but they're much more reasonable, manageable levels. And I don't see or expect appreciation to get anywhere near where we were, in the 08, 09, that kind of time frame.
Great. I got the thumbs up from Matthew. Thanks, Matthew. So the next question in the queue is from MT, who has a question that I wanted to ask, but I'll let them go ahead and do it. MT, I'm going to unmute you now. Just kidding. I cannot unmute MT for some reason. Well, apologies for the technical difficulties, but I'll go ahead and ask a question. Or their question. The question is, when you're talking about down payment, you had said, it is sort of a myth that you need to have 20%. Now it's able to do, you're able to put down lower. The question is it better to put down 20% or a higher percent and have no PMI, or is it worth investing that 15% and pay PMI insurance? I think.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. There's a myth about PMI, and we've all been conditioned to think it's a bad thing. And if you don't have to pay it, it's great. But something that most home buyers don't know or realize is that when a loan has mortgage insurance, your lender is actually able to offer you a slightly lower interest rate because the lender themselves have protection on the loan. Right? That's an insurance policy to protect the lender. And anytime you can alleviate risk, you can cheapen your rate and price. So typically speaking, you'll see slightly lower interest rates on loans that have mortgage insurance than when you put the full 20% down. Now, the other piece of that is there's a lot of different PMI options. It's not just the payment or monthly piece in your payment, right? So a lot of people think if I don't put 20% down, I have mortgage insurance in my payment. You can actually buy it out inexpensively for a one-time fee in cash at closing, buy it out and actually take that one-time fee and finance it into the loan. It's always going to be very specific to your individual circumstances, which is like a really important piece here, right? Because you could always hear of someone doing X, Y, Z to eliminate mortgage insurance, but we have to stay grounded and remember to live within your circumstances. But there's a number of ways to preserve cash or cheapen your payment by buying it out. It's just going to be an evaluation of your priorities and what makes the most sense for you. Does that help?
Yes. I was still trying to unmute MT and was unsuccessful in that effort, but yes, that helped. David, did you have anything to add on that or no?
No, I defer to Chris. He's the expert in that section. So
sounds good. So the next question is from Joanna. Joanna, I'm going to try to unmute you and see if this works. Yeah, no, I'm not able to unmute folks. Angela, are you able to? Oh, there you go. Joanna, you are unmuted.
Yeah.
Joanna, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm making dinner right now, maybe later.
All right, I'm going to try one more time for Joanna. No dice. Joanna's question was, now I've lost the thread. Where do you find a professional to help you with your pre-approval process?
So I'll be completely honest. I am referred. In 99% of the time, I'm referred by either a past client of mine, a trusted partner like David. So my recommendation is to turn to whom you trust the most and leverage those individuals. Obviously, personality, there's a number of factors to what's important: accessibility, education, the education piece, and quite honestly, likability. You're going to be spending a lot of time with us, more so with Dave than I, looking at homes. So you got to make sure you like the person. But I always recommend turning to those you trust most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in anything in the home buying process, it's such a personal time that if you don't trust and like the person, it's going to make it a very frustrating time. So turn to people that you trust and that you like. If they have somebody that they used and they liked and trusted, chances are that if they liked and trusted them, you like and trust that person you're asking, then there's a good chance the people that they trust you'll like and trust you. So that's what I always tell people, ask those you love, ask those you trust, who do you recommend, and take it from there.
Sounds great. So we have one more question from the queue, and I'm going to go ahead and just ask it. I've lost it. This is from Ryan, and this is questions are opinion. What are your opinions on house hacking?
House hacking meaning purchasing this is what I typically think of when I hear this, and I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So buying a multiple unit home and living in one of the units, having others pay.
It is unclear to me. Let me try and see if Ryan is available to unmute.
Hey, yeah, Dave, that was my question. Just things on is now a good time? Is this the right location? Just general opinions on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot goes into that because you want to make sure that if you're purchasing a multi-unit home, it needs to be one that's going to be profitable for you. And you want to make sure that it's going to be something that you can rent out to others that's going to cover your expenses and hopefully make you some extra money as well. That's going to be a really specific to you, specific to the area that you want to look in, specific to a property itself. That's probably a longer conversation. I don't think there's ever a bad time to think about that and to be thinking in the long term for that. Chris, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say with multi-units, you want to really explore your financing options. There's, I don't want to say restrictive guidelines, but they change across the loan programs. So for instance, FHA loan guidelines are very different for a multi-unit as opposed to conventional. And the main difference is the down payment requirement. So if that's something you're considering, you want to make sure you really know, okay, well, what's the difference if it's a 2-unit, 3-unit, or 4-unit? Because they all might have different requirements depending on whether it's conventional or FHA. So that's important to consider that.
Matt, I see in the chat here, you said, adding on to hacking multiple units, what about thoughts on buying more than you are comfortable with, 3-bedroom versus 1-bedroom, and then getting roommates to pay the mortgage? The important thing to remember there is that you have to qualify for that 3-bedroom house yourself. If you can find friends that then will, or anybody, I guess they don't have to be friends, roommates that, want to pay rent for one of those rooms to cover that mortgage, that's a great option that you can, try to explore. Yeah, I've helped people do that in the past when they find out that they can afford a 2 or 3 bedroom. All they need is one, and they're cool with having a roommate. And that can be a great option. But again, it comes down to one of those. Every situation is unique, and it has to be right for you at the time.
And if I could just add on to that, because it's a question we get a lot when it comes to financing, is piggybacking off of Dave. At the end of the day, if the other roommates bail or move out or leases expire, remember, you're still on the hook for the full payment. So I totally understand the sentiment of using them to maybe perhaps offset some of the mortgage costs. But I always say plan for the worst and hope for the best. So as long as you're comfortable with, if you never had roommates, then I think it's a good idea. But I'm a little bit more on the conservative side, making sure that you feel comfortable in the worst case scenario first.
Great. So we are nearing the end of our time. I wanted to give David or Chris any opportunity, any closing comments you'd like to make before we wrap up.
Chris, if you want to go first, that's cool with me.
Don't put me on the spot.
Yep.
I think the thing that's the most important when it comes to the financing piece is it the right time for you? It's funny, when Dave and I were preparing for this webinar and looking at some of the data, I was putting in the context of my book of business and the folks I've helped, and it was pretty close actually. But I cannot stress enough that when you're ready, that makes the most sense. And you can never have too much education. So feel free to reach out to either one of us with thoughts, ideas. Even if you're not ready, we're happy to just be a resource to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That was pretty much what I was going to say. At the end of the day, if you want to use a different real estate agent and a different mortgage lender for your transaction, that's totally cool with us. We just want to be here to help and help educate. We think there's not enough education about this type of the biggest purchase of your life per se out there, or there's a lot of contradictory information. I put out a lot of stuff on Facebook pretty much every day, just educational stuff, things you should know. So check out my Facebook page. Chris does the same. He puts out a lot of cool informational stuff. If you ever have any questions, just give us a call, shoot us a text, email, whatever. We're always around to help, regardless of where you are and what your final goals are.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today.